Welcome to Straight Science. Straight Science is an evening seminar series put on by University of Alaska Fairbanks Northwest Campus, where you are all in tonight. And looks like we have a large audience from the outside tuning in. And also University of Alaska Fairbanks Alaska Sea Grant. So that's me. And both Northwest Campus and Alaska Sea Grant, we are public servants of the Bering Strait region. We serve all peoples of the Bering Strait region, which is the homeland and waters of the Inupiaq, St. Lawrence Island, Yupik, and Central Yupik peoples. So tonight we have a Straight Science with people who are no stranger to the Bering Strait region. We've got Jackie Grebmeier and Lee Cooper, and they are both professors at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, Chesapeake Biological Lab in Solomons, Maryland. And they've been no stranger to the Bering Strait region. They've been studying the region since they were 12, and I think you guys now have how many years in?
It's
a long time. Decades. That's good enough. Decades of experience.
It's about 40 years.
Yeah. And alumni of UAF.
Tonight, in front of Nome earlier today, we had the U.S. Coast Guard icebreaker Healy that was out front, and I think they have. Are they still out front?
No,
but they moved on their way to make room for the Canadian Coast Guard, which is coming in the Sir Wilfrid Laurier. Nobody wants to get too close. The Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and they are coming to Nome to pick up all the people from the cruise that is here currently in Nome, waiting for their arrival. So we see you on there, Sir Wilfrid Laurier. So we're hoping you have a good, safe trip up. We're ready for you. And with that, we're going to hear about the Distributed Biological Observatory project. I always know it here as the DBO. And this is a long-term project, I think 25 years. Again, they started when they were 10. The 25th year of the science that they're doing. It's crazy important for the region. To hear what you guys are finding. We are living through, in the Bering Strait region, extreme change, both environmentally, ecologically, industrially, and geopolitically in our marine environment. So things are changing rapidly up here, and I will hand it off to Lee Cooper.
Well, I'm going to start off and talk a little bit, and then I'll turn it over to Jackie. There's a picture of the ship down southwest of St. Matthew Island, according to our best information sources, and heading our way. And let me go to the next slide. Oops, over there. Okay, so we're going back a few years. This is the 25th year that Jackie and I have been guests of the Canadian government in sailing on the Sir Wilfrid Laurier. It's a ship based in Victoria, British Columbia, that sails into the Canadian Arctic, takes care of buoys and channel markers and things of that nature in the Canadian Arctic. But of course, it passes through U.S. waters to reach Canada. And so we were given the opportunity starting in 1998. We've had a couple of years we weren't able to participate. In 2020, something happened that interfered with a lot of science. Last year, another thing interfered was the ship was broken and in the shipyard for a long time. So when I count up the years going back to 1998, this is the 25th year that we've had the opportunity. We do have data from 2020, and we do have data from 2024 from other ships. But the interesting thing about going on the Laurier is every year it goes through the Bering Sea at the same time in July, so we can consistently see what's going on every July. So the record that we have from the Laurier is one of coming in July and seeing what the conditions are. And this is a distributed biological observatory in that it's developed into a program that depends on other countries. And I'll start with just saying that we started working internationally, of course, because the big boundary is between the U.S. and Russia. And so President Nixon went to Moscow in 1974 and signed, among other things, an environmental agreement that still enforces the Russian-U.S. agreement. Obviously, it's not very active right now because of events out of our control. But I just wanted to emphasize a couple of things that they were thinking about in 1974. Somebody wrote this into the agreement that US and Russia, or the Soviet Union at that time, wished to cooperate on the influence of environmental changes on climate. And also to focus on Arctic and subarctic ecological systems that are shared, and we're still doing that today. We're still very focused on what's the environmental changes that are happening in the Bering Strait region as in terms of that. And that's sort of the basis for doing this. And this little video that I'll run for a few seconds shows some people making palminis, if it'll run. No, I guess it
Yeah,
won't.
you might, just as an aside, you might ask that if the audience, and I don't know if we're using this system now or your audio, if the audience could get off the video. Like Janet Balise, if you could turn your video off, it's a real strain on our rural Starlink. Thank you so much.
Okay,
That may help.
so that, it sounds like the sound is working. And anyway, so this was a cruise that we did in 1993. I think Gay Sheffield was on this boat too, the beautiful ship you can see there, and it stopped in Nome. And so Russians and US scientists were able to participate in this. And I sort of think of this as, it's really, we've simplified the sampling we do quite a bit, but I like to think we're going way back until that agreement that was signed in 1974 led to cruises, joint ones that were the US State Department helped with, that happened in 1978, 1984, 1988. Jackie was on the one in 1988, and this one in 1993 at the end of the Soviet era. And we had a brief honeymoon of sorts where we could cross back and forth across the US-Russian boundary line without too much trouble, and shared resources, and hopefully someday we'll be able to go back to that sharing of data and information and studies that are going on. And in fact, we've talked with Gay recently about some Russian scientists who may be able to participate in a straight science presentation about things that are still going on the Russian side. So we're hoping to maybe have that happen in the fall. So what are we doing now in terms of the Distributed Biological Observatory? It's easy, relatively easy, and I'll show you in a second what's happened with the sea ice. We can see that from space, and so we know the sea ice is changing and retreating. The effects are more extreme to the north than they are to the south. When in the winter, the differences, those different colored green lines at the bottom, are where the sea ice boundary is in the winter. The ones that are spread out much more are all the variation that's happened in the summer. So we're seeing quite a bit more variation where the sea ice retreats to in the summer versus what happens in the Bering Sea in the winter. And we decided pretty early on to focus on some places that are interesting biologically. The last slide I showed you, we went all over the place and sampled all over the place in the Bering Sea. And really, you don't have all the resources to do that all the time. So we've focused on this cruise on the Laurier is on 4 or 5 of those little boxes that are numbered. So the first place we're going to go is number 1, do some sampling there. And the idea is to focus on these biological hotspots. Even the US and Canada share the use of this ship. It's not enough. The Koreans are actually coming en route to Dutch Harbor. So the Japanese send the Mirai. So and China sends their icebreakers also. So there's actually an international suite of ships that sample, and part of the DBO arrangement, and Jackie will talk about more of this, the expansion and the international cooperation, is to share the sampling sites and share the protocols. We do the same sort of sampling. And so the DBO concept is actually proven attractive, and Jackie will cover that at the end, is some of the things that we're doing in the last bullet point in other parts of the Arctic to spread this idea around. So to go on and talk just specifically about this cruise that we're going to board in a couple of days. We'll go to all those places that have green dots on them. If there's ice in the way, that might alter what we're going to do. But those are the stations we'll occupy. They're historically the ones we keep going to. We use this vessel again that's based in British Columbia. We have participants from Fisheries and Oceans Canada, from the University of Victoria, Victoria, British Columbia, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, St. Mary's College of Maryland, University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences, and I think I got everybody. But if not, I apologize. Part of this is also to reach out to our local communities here in the Bering Strait region and all the way up to Utqiagvik. So we've made some presentations previously about what we're planning to do, where the ship will be, just to clear the bases, make sure we're not interfering with anybody or people aren't surprised by having this red and white ship with a maple flag on it come sailing in. And so part of that is what we do before the cruise, and we also try to report back. And so we're happy to be able to provide information on the things we're finding, and we'll present some of those that information tonight. But we're happy to do that and to go out and visit.
Someone joined in.
Okay.
Remind everyone to mute themselves.
Yes, please, if you're online, go ahead and mute yourself. That'll preserve our bandwidth here in remote Nome and keep the internet flowing.
Yeah.
So again, these are the 5 spots. These are the changes in the sea ice. So the darker the green, the more recent they are. You can see that to the north, that's where the big expansion of open water has happened. The Bering Sea itself in the winter is sort of insulated or separated because it's a narrow strait in the Bering Strait from sea ice. So actually the sea ice coverage hasn't changed too much, although in individual years that's not true in the winter. So there's some changes, and we've had an odd winter this past winter too. But that's basically the information, and Karen Fry, who's here from Clark University, and her team do work at sea with the optics as well as looking at the satellite observations to tie that to what we're seeing on the sea floor or the sea surface. And now, this is just to show you the simulation of what's happening over recent years in terms of the sea ice boundaries. Might add that last year was a very light sea ice year here, that there's some interest in how cold is the water out there. So we'll know that in a week or two when we get out to south of St. Lawrence Island. That's where the cold pool is. Water there is below 0 Celsius, so below 32 degrees Fahrenheit year round. But in recent years, some years like 2018, it got above 0, above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And that allows fish to migrate further north. That can have impacts on the ecosystem. And then, so here's a recent record, and you can see 2025 is a little odd. These are from the different boxes, the 5 different boxes that we're going to try to sample this year. You can see that in 2025 at DBO1, for example, the sea ice disappeared relatively early in May, and the averages are the black lines. So there's some variation as we go further north. And there's actually, it's an odd year. There's not much ice, or wasn't much ice at the furthest south stations. But when we go to the north in DBO 4 and 5, so up near Utqiagvik and Wainwright, there's actually still ice there. So there's some question. It's an icebreaker, but it doesn't go through a lot of trouble to go into ice if it doesn't have to. So we'll see if we're able to sample some of those more northern stations there. Again, this is all based on doing the sampling in July when we want to. These are the kinds of data we collect, the hydrography, so the temperature of the water. There's some big differences west to east, both of the nutrients. So on the nutrient slide on the right, the warmer colors, that's where there's more nutrients, so it tends to be deeper and it tends to be to the west. All of these figures here are west to east, and it's on our what we call our DBO3 line that extends from the international date line to Point Hope. Yes, Gay.
So the way to look at these graphs would be that's a cross section. The top would be the surface waters, and the bottom would be at depth, the sea floor. Is that how you look at?
Yes, that's right, Gay. Thank you for that clarification. They're west east, so the left side is to the west, so the Russian side and to the east is coming up to the U.S. boundary. You can see that. Say if you're at Point Hope in far western Alaska, that there actually isn't much in the way of nutrients. The purple, pink colors are low nutrients. The orange and yellow are more nutrients, and then the temperature is the same scale, relatively speaking. So warmer water versus colder water. And so we've done all of this work over 20 years or more than 20 years, where we've been collecting nutrients, for example. And this is the average of, and you can see that there's big differences. So, for example, my mouse is working.
Yeah, there it is.
You can see this site here. So due west of us here in Nome and north of St. Lawrence Island, there's a big difference whether are you on the side of the Bering Sea that gets water coming washing ashore across the international date line from Russia, then you're gonna have lots of nutrients. To the east, as you get close to King Island and this neighborhood near Nome, there's very little in the way of nutrients in the water column. And this is something that's consistent every July, every year, and it's actually consistent for other parts of the year. So you can see the differences here. This is the mean over all of these years, so this is a consistent pattern. And so one of the things we've been looking at is there's more water flowing north. Is there more? Are there more nutrients appearing? And the only pattern that we've been able to really verify, and it'd be interesting to see this year because there's so little ice this past winter here in this area, is that in years in which there's very little ice, there wasn't much of a phytoplankton bloom, so a lot of nutrients got left behind. So the peaks are years in which there was actually relatively little ice. So what would we presume is that we'll see more nutrients in the water this year since the water's warmer, and there wasn't as much ice. And then this is we're just doing a lot of trend analysis. This is that area north of St. Lawrence Island, so west of here in Nome, in the far northern Bering Sea, looking at patterns of nitrates fertilizer in the ocean for all the phytoplankton. And so that's a key thing to measure. And of course, one of the things we're also measuring is how productive is it. One of our Canadian colleagues is making this measurement of silica in the water column. The silica is used by diatoms, the little tiny plants that are in the ocean, and have been able to, Diana Varela, who's at University of Victoria, has cooperated in publishing this work to show how much silica is being taken up by the diatoms that are in the water column. So as we switch to talking about less chemistry and more animals, I wanted to share the floor with Jackie. She'll tell you a little bit about how the biological system is changing over time.
All right.
And use this as your cursor right there.
Right, I got that idea.
Okay.
Thanks, Lee. What I did want to say is that I want to welcome all of you who have just come in too, but also that we have the team here. We have the chief scientist for our collaborative program, Paul McCon, here. All the science party is in the back. People who are actually working, when we say Canadians, these are our Canadian colleagues. They're coming in the back. We forced the Americans to come front because they didn't want to sit in the front. So anyway, welcome for it. But this is what I'm going to show here. This is work that John Nelson has done on zooplankton. And what you're basically seeing here is that heat wave. I think you all probably remember 217, 218. And what you're seeing here is this really big pulse at that time. And I think I can't walk away from the camera, but I'll put the thing here.
You can.
Yeah, can really small zooplankton. And so there's been a real increase. This ratio means are they smaller or large? The whales and so forth would prefer to have larger krill, large copepods, and the smaller zooplankton are not as, you have to have a lot more of them to come through. So what this average has shown you is that when it was warm, there tend to be smaller. This has an influence also on the prey availability for seabirds. And so if you remember way back in my earlier times, the Bering Sea, when we had this coccolithophore, this a lot of white type of plankton, they were very small microplankton. The birds had a hard time feeding on it. And we have Liz Lubunsky is here, so she's from Fish and Wildlife. If you have any questions afterwards. But the main thing is that when you have more heat, it's changing the biological composition of what's out there. And if we tend to have more, the high peak there, we may have more small, they're going to take advantage of eating a lot of phytoplankton. And if they eat that, there's less that goes down to what I like to study, which are clams and worms and things in the bottom that are important for gray whales, walruses, and bearded seals, that type of thing. And so this is the kind of having a ecosystem from soup to nuts, basically on this cruise, from physics to chemistry to biology, upper trophics. We can look at it in comparison to see where the connectivity in the food web. All right, so now this is kind of this is looking at the color coding on the type of animals that are on the bottom of the ocean in these hot spots. So a lot of clams, you can see upper right is the grab that we use up here. And this was a past student called Chelsea Koch, who's now a professor at American University. A lot of these clams here, these are important for the animals that feed off of the benthic in the sediments, and then marine worms. And what you're basically seeing here is the change from the 2000s to 2021. And if you see the change in colors and the decline, that means that basically the cafeteria for a lot of these animals that like to feed off the benthos are not getting as much as a bang for their buck. Could be a spectacled eider in the southwest of St. Lawrence Island. There are threatened species, could be walruses. And so what we're seeing is this change in the composition of the animals that are in this food for them to eat. So when you go from south to north in this region, just southwest of St. Lawrence Island, that we see these trends. So basically this is south here and you're going north. And you'll see in the last, since about 2016, almost all of them are in decline. This is now, I'm looking at food, biomass. How much food is there going to be? And that means most of the time these animals, they're bulk and big, and that's what these animals want to have. Because if you're going to dive 60 meters like an eider, you want to get as many of very rich clams that you can get, and not get tiny ones that you can't have much food from. So it's important for them. So we're seeing a decline in both these bivalves and polychaetes, and this is important, as I said, for both eiders and walruses in the region. If you go to the next one, which is now you're north of St. Lawrence Island here, the pink are these amphipods. They look like tiny shrimps. They build themselves in tubes. They go up and down these tubes. So when I was a graduate student back in the 80s, there would be like 10,000 of straws in each yard squared. And there would be these amphipods going up and down, and the gray whales would take advantage of that food. They have their calves in Baja California, and they come up. If many of you might know that there has been a stress, their unusual mortality event, looks like it might be kicking back in again because they're not having their calves. And so why aren't they having a calf? That's something for the scientists to look at, but a lot of it, they've got to bulk feed up in the Chirikov Basin and into the Chukchi Sea to be able to go back 4,000 kilometers down and then have their calves. And so there's a whole cycle of life going on here, and we're trying to figure out why this event is happening again in that area. And part of it, not only you can see the pinks declining, you can see the little amphipod on the upper right, but they can also feed on krill. So krill are things that bowheads really like to have. So now you have bowheads that want to have copepods and they krill. It looks like the currents are going faster through Bering Strait. They are potentially bringing krill forward. So now north of Bering Strait, you have humpback whales that normally they're more subarctic species. They're on a more regular basis. You have bowhead whales feeding at different times. You have gray whales up there. So now you have a lot of different species that would normally spread themselves feeding on the water, on zooplankton or the benthos, all now trying to feed off of that resource. And so that may be, there's a lot of studies looking at why the upper trophics that people hunt on bowhead whales that are so important, that seem to be healthy, but they are being now having to compete with animals that are also looking for that type of food. The other thing I would point out is that these lower ones that are brown and yellow, the declining, these used to all be that bright pink. When I was a graduate student, these were the standard stations. They were food for these gray whales, and those have totally turned to low biomass worms that they're not feeding on, and then a little bit of a few of the clams. So it's becoming a very, very small patch. And that's what we're seeing in all of these areas, is that there seems to be a contraction of these rich feeding areas on the bottom of the ocean, and the change in the composition. And this is just, I wasn't going to take you all the way up in every DBO region, but I did want to point out, this is north of Bering Strait. So this is our hot spot area, highest biomass, because if you were to look at the left here, and if you could actually read this, the highest would be about 30 grams carbon per meter squared. If you go north of it, you're going up to 200 grams carbon per meter squared. This is a lot of food on the bottom of the ocean. And what you can see that it was back in about 2012 here that you started really seeing an increase. And that was because we had the pullback of sea ice, we had a lot more beginning of phytoplankton production. There was no zooplankton grazing on them, so a lot of that hit the bottom. And so we had a lot of these clams able to feed on them. But even that in recent years, we're starting to see some changes going on here. But this is still a big hotspot for potentially for walruses, but they tend to ride the ice north. But so as soon as they go north, they're just moving across that area, but they come back down in the fall. And they oftentimes, I know many of you see it, they come onto land, but they lose a lot of energy if they have to be in water and not on ice. So there's a whole group of US Geological Survey and other scientists looking at those changes. And I think the Norseman too was just through here. They were doing work on looking at populations of walruses. So just to give you an idea of that one. So there's this is Andrea Fox. She works with Lee. She finished her master's degree a couple of years ago. She's now on land, but we're going to get it back into the ocean. But we use a camera system on the bottom of the ocean, and what you're seeing are the pictures on the right here. And what we do is up at Utqiagvik, we have this line going from near shore, what we call the Barrow Canyon Line 1, to offshore. And this is the camera system on the lower left, and we real time can see what the bottom of the ocean is looking like. So as we go across the canyon, you'll notice as we get down deeper, maybe you can't see this, but this is down 110 meters, 300 feet. 110, you get these basket stars. These are sea anemones, sea corals, single corals, a lot of biodiversity. So when you hear people say, oh, biodiversity, they look using all different type of niches, but it's like a coral garden down there, or and you can see by the colors. And then you move up on, get shallower on the western part, and you move into this a lot of brittle stars. Brittle stars are not really good food for animals to feed on. So it's you know, so this particular observing system is to look at where the outflow of carbon and material is going into the basin. So it's really kind of exciting. We do this actually at every station, so we can see what the bottom looks like. But when we're down in DBO south of St. Lawrence Island, or even in the particularly south of St. Lawrence Island and north of Bering Strait, it's really muddy. And so your camera visibility is not as great. So we tend to show the best pictures of the colors that you have. But we do have some exciting findings in that we started seeing fish on pollock coming up, which we hadn't seen before. And that was during the heat wave period of time. And we also see krill. And so that is something that we say, but it's qualitative, right? So that's one of the things we're talking with our colleagues to be able to do, look at those collections. If there's a way to do nets more in the future, to look at these krill populations, because they're important to bowheads, but they're important for any filter feeding big marine mammal. So, and then I think you are all aware of the environmental stressors. So when we're out there, this cruise on the Laurier, as well as the cruises, the subsequent you'll hear about from the Sikuliak, there'll be a straight science talk that Katrina Eichen from UAF will give. There are two important things: the harmful algal blooms, which are those toxic, and I think Gay's mentioned about it. The fact that they are being incorporated into clams, into tunicates, which are then consumed by other organisms, including humans. And so that's something that there's a whole policy that if we have this machine that on one of the ships and many of the ships actually that actually do real-time look at these harmful algal blooms, information is then conveyed to the medical folks. There's a whole, right?
Yeah, I don't know if the outside audiences can hear. They can hear you, but I don't know
Yeah.
if they can hear an audience question. Okay, so at the IFCB machine is basically an underwater microscope, and it's chugging along looking at water as the ship travels. It will alert at a certain threshold, which is I think at about 1,000 cells of Alexandrian per liter.
Mhm.
It'll alert, and the scientists will get the state of Alaska involved
Right.
immediately, so we can get the human medical community
Right,
focused on that.
so if you haven't heard what Gay said, I mean, there is a protocol in place.
Great.
They
Thank
said-
you.
And then, right, actually, we don't have to repeat it, but the important thing is that is a whole protocol is in place that it goes right to the important people for the notification to the coastal communities. That for people that really know what to do under those circumstances. So the other thing, but we go, so we collect sediments, we collect animals that are then measured by folks in the Alaska Morphological Bloom Network. The other stressor, and you could, I think you may have heard this at previous talks, is with the warming temperature, we also have ocean acidification. What that means is that things get more acidic, so it's like having more lemon in water than to have it more neutral, and that becomes corrosive. And so there are, and so you can see here where the, over here, the harmful algal blooms, but on the lower left, their big impact is on clams or anything that builds calcium carbonate on there. So there are measurements being made, and our Canadian colleagues are looking at PCO2, they're looking at measurements that are collected in the water column, and then analyzing that in Canada. So it feeds into a better understanding within our collaborative program of how that ecosystem is potentially changes, and what then we look at the biological part, what impact that might have on that. So one thing is that I would just show this is one example of the data that we're collecting. So these are hotspots. Now you're looking at the numbers of so these are numbers of these amphipods and where these hotspots are located, southwest of St. Lawrence Island, in the Chiricahua Basin, up in the western part of the DB03 in the southeast Chukchi Sea, up by Wainwright and into Barrow Canyon. And these are also areas important for marine mammals and seabirds. And I just want to point out on the right hand, this is focused on gray whales. But what you're seeing is that the gray whales, in the same time we're having gray whales and changes this, we also are having humpback whales in there. But also, as I said, bowhead whales in this region. But they are up there feeding in this area, and this information is then to be provided to for ships. So you obviously getting more and more ship operations up here, reduction of sea ice. So it's really whatever the policy is going to be, the potential for strike impacts is there, and it's something that needs to be evaluated and needs to be addressed by government management, whether it's state or federal on that. But so this data that was provided from our program here, and with the observing that we have marine mammal observer on boards, these vessels, we also, the seabird work that U.S. Fish and Wildlife is doing, that then actually feeds into, like, this particular data went into this nature, this cetacean special group. So then the data gets to be brought forward to that, fed into some type of policy evaluation. And this all got turned around. You don't have to look a lot. The main thing from this, I would just point out, is that green lower line here. This is the small amphipods, and this is over time from the 1988 to 2020. And so we had really high amounts of this food, a lot of health, the gray whales were there, and then the declines that were going on. And this is where this is work being done by another graduate student, Brian Marks, and looking at changes in the size. Once again, now we're back at size. These amphipods, a gray whale, or whether you're a walrus spawn, clams, you'd like to have a big juicy, if you're gonna put the energy to go get something off the bottom of the ocean or gulp it, you'd like to have a lot of caloric content on that. And what we're finding is that these animals are getting smaller and they don't weigh as much. And so the energy that it takes to get to the bottom of the ocean or to take a swath in the water is not getting you as much as it used to in the past. And so this is looking at, this is just one example of looking at the density, the type of food available, and how that gray whales are they're not foraging as much in the Chiricahua, they're moving further north for foraging. That puts them in competition with other upper trophic animals up there. And then this is Liz Lubunsky, who is in the room here. So it's great to have these marine mammal and seabird observers on board. And so these are the objectives. They're up on the bridge. They work with the bridge personnel and the captain. They're making measurements, looking at the counts on the type and identifying the type of birds. They look at species and richness, and then they compare that to environmental parameters that we collect. And you can see some of the survey efforts they do, but they're always on the bridge, working every day from the morning to night, till they finally have to go to bed, or it gets too dark. And they're getting us information on what is out there and the type of animal, either. Most of it for Liz's work is seabirds, but she also picks out the marine mammals. And when we have a marine mammal person on there, they have a focus just on the marine mammal part. And then I just would close up on this, is that the concept of set stations and time series and some set measurements that we're willing to share data between countries and cruises has been found to be very valuable for other regions. And so we have a group, we had a Pacific Arctic group that Christina and I co-chaired last year, a couple of years, and I've chaired way back, but it's now being chaired by Eugene Yang, who actually, I think they do work here in Nome from COPRI, the Korean Ocean Polar Research Institute. She's the new chair. Anyway, we have various meetings, but the main thing that is that they are building, this is our DBO here. Most of this activity goes on here is by our Canadian colleagues. They maintain the one with DBO 8 particularly. We have DBO 6 periodically, but they're building on the East Siberian Sea. So there'll be a cruise. I'm not sure they're going to be coming to Nome. That Igor Polyakov from the University of Alaska Fairbanks will be leading on the Healy. It's called the Nansen-Amundsen Basin Observing System. They are building a relationship with the Koreans to do these same type of time series measurements off the Russian EEZ, because we can't deal with that right now, and looking at where this important water is going into the deep Arctic basin. Warming water is melting the sea ice. There's a big inflow on that. The Europeans have built a DBO Atlantic sector, so they're doing standard station measurements. And so it's nice to always have, you know, the idea that we can work together and collect some standard measurements and we share in data workshops is being emulated now. And also in the Canadian waters in the Baffin Bay. It's the Davis Strait Baffin Bay Observing System. So all of these we put in a proposal are endorsed by the UN Decade of Ocean Sciences, so the United Nations put forward, which means basically they give you a stamp but no money. And they want you to convey how you can build a network together. So we're doing that. So I think that covers, it takes you from the warming and the changes that we're seeing in the chemistry to the zooplankton to up into the marine, to the benthos and to the marine mammals. So there's a lot of people involved. If there are current cruise, and if there's specific questions related to any of these slides, there are people in the audience that know more because they did the collections of Sarah. I'm looking back at here with all the hydrography photos that figures that we show. But anyway, these people, if there's specific questions, I will be pointing to you if I can't do the answer on it. But the Canadian Coast Guard has been a great perpetual collaboration with the both. We share in the collection of the data. They specialize in certain aspects. We do in others. It's a great ship to work on. The crew is very happy, very hardworking for us. Captain's accommodating. And then there's just some of these time series are built off of data from other ships, like be it the Healy or the Sikuliak or the Norseman 2. And then all the agencies that are funding for it. We have been lucky to get funded for another 5 years for this collaborative program with our Canadian colleagues. So we'll be coming back to do these standard measurements. And then if there's any interest, this will be the recording. There's some websites there. We have one that you can, there's data sets there, there's presentations. We submit all this data to the Arctic Data Center. It's all publicly available. So if anybody, like a high school, all students or anybody wanted to, but you could do this as a project, download the data and look at some analyses. And then some of the NOAA data actually goes to the National Centers for Environmental Information. So there are landing pages. If you go to the Arctic Data Center specifically, you can land on the DBO website, and we're building it so that you can get metafile from other archives, because the US has multiple data archives depending on agency. So we're trying to make sure this observing system can tap into all of those so that it's one-stop shopping and you don't have to go to every one of these websites. So with that, I'm just ending up with this picture because I like this picture. Karen Fry took this.
And with that, so we want to thank Jackie and Lee for such a nice presentation. So And before you start asking your questions and more for the people who are online, it's always nice, it's never easy to be a straight science, any kind of public speaker. And tonight, thank you for powering through with this rough start. But the for Jackie and Lee, the straight science audience, you know, we are really appreciative in this region for having people come and talk to us. And so if you're listening online and you want to put something nice in the chat, show a little love for Jackie and Lee for giving us this presentation tonight. So we're really appreciative, and we're thankful to Jackie and Lee. So throw some love there in the chat for them. And with that, gives people a little time to formulate their questions.
I recognize that Norman Thomas is on, and he was the captain on the Laurier for many years, so he was instrumental in helping us get this started in the beginning, I think. So thank you.
Yeah.
And so you wanna have questions from,
There's some chat questions. or
Yeah,
points,
and unfortunately, since you're gonna have to go to the chat, go down to your chat menu.
there it is.
And
Right.
Click on the chat menu.
Oh, I see it, just read
On
it.
the,
Some of the Sir Wilfrid Laurier crew also online. Thank you. Great to have you. We'll be seeing you on Friday. If you have questions, put them in the chat. We can hear the audience questions clearly, so they didn't have to repeat. Then let's see, very informative. Let's see, blah, blah, blah. Let's see.
That's her appreciation. Okay, she is appreciative of those nice comments.
Yes, thank you.
Get it up. I'm trying to move this up. Previous straight side talks have been about the trawl surveys. Have the biomass readings from the NOAA study been correlated to this area and surveys in
Good
the area?
question.
Very interesting, because I just got an email to put some of this data sets into the next survey annual information newsletter or analysis that they're doing for the Benthic survey in there. We have been providing it because we are connected with NOAA, but now we're actually gonna be, I guess, moved up to a little bit higher
Wonderful.
level in that. So that is good news.
For the people in the room who are from this region, that NOAA bottom trawl survey, which was the one that found the big shakeup in 2018 and 2017 of the southern Bering Sea ecosystem rolling right into the north and our ecosystem and causing havoc. They are currently out right now, and they are doing the whole Bering Sea. So in November, they're gonna give us a presentation to show us what they found. So we've already got that locked in, and I hope you guys will be a part of that too, or listen in so you can hear what they found.
Nice questions people have. Thank you for all those people saying nice things online. It's nice to hear. No, Tom, yeah, nice to see you both having fun up there. Yeah, yes.
Still.
I think keep scrolling.
Yeah, I think there was a question about filtering nutrients,
Yes, yes,
and the
yes.
answer is yes.
What's the question?
I'm trying to bring it up. Yeah, it's basically the question was, do you filter for silica, the nutrients when you collect the nutrients, are they being filtered for silica?
Yeah,
I know we do.
we do, yes.
So on the data sets that we have shown up this talk, we filter all our nutrients on there, but they don't get stored in anything that might have silica. Because it's not a good idea. Yes?
And you just had a chat question go by, and Justina, this is Gay. Justina's watching in from Sabunga. Yes, this will be available on the Straight Science YouTube page. Give me a little time. We've got to get the fella who will turn it into a video YouTube. And also he's got to cut out my bad start.
There was some 4-letter words said.
No. But thank you so much, Justina, and we're glad you're listening in. So this is a really interesting one regarding our northern Bering Sea ecosystem. So thank you for joining.
Yes.
Joseph Davis, Glacier View, Alaska, 100 miles inland from Anchorage. Longtime resident from up here. I'm now working with geomorphologists for the last couple of years to determine mega landslides called instabilities, and they come and they study movement of these massive sides of land. But what they're also doing is presenting their information to our council and to different groups in our community and other communities. Their personal goal is to communicate with communities about what they're learning, but also learn what they can from the locals.
Mhm.
And I'm the in-between guy. And I'm quite intentional in that. I have bilingual cross-cultural teacher training, and I'm in between two different groups. And they both talk at each other, they both give data, they both get information. But it's a vastly different thing to have a conversation. Instead of just, we'll lecture first and then we'll hear from you second. It's a very different kind of process to actually communicate in a more developing way. And what, you're going by villages up and down the coast on both sides and whatever. And do you have a group of people that are interested in helping scientists speak to civilians and citizens to understand? You can't say, yes, this is gonna happen because of that. You say, well, if it's increasing trend of this and that, it could happen, but really, we don't know, or, both sides are making assumptions, et cetera, and so how do you address communities in a more meaningful way? Cause I wanna know how.
Well, I know that, when particularly before COVID, we would go out to like St. Lawrence Island, and we'd have community meetings with in Savunga and Gamble, but the same thing at Point Hope. We had workshops here in Nome and Utiavik and Wainwright. And to have a community, and usually they're not done in the summertime, because
No,
we find that people are out picking
Yeah.
berries or doing whatever. We do it in January and February. So we have been out there when you can land on we go out to the island or other communities in the winter time when they're not hunting. So we don't want to overlap the hunting, be it spring or summer. Gay, you want to say something, but we're not perfect, but that's what we found, that sitting down and talking to people and getting feedback. So we've talked to the elders there, the seniors come to the meeting. Let's say we were last in Savunga, and we sat and then we had a conversation with coffee and all that. Then the community would come in the evening,
Yeah.
we spend the night type of thing.
yeah.
So we have, go ahead, Gabe, now you can say.
So what I'm hearing, and where are you from again? I'm sorry.
The glacier, you're home of the mighty Matanuska Glacier,
Okay, so I don't know, what is your borough?
Matsuboro.
Matsuboro, okay. So I would say the best thing in your case would be to go to your regional hub and find the education center, or look at what the tribes are in your region. And for us in the Bering Strait region, we're a kind of a bit unique for Alaska. Not have a borough. We're in a borough, but it's called an unorganized
Yeah, I
borough.
know,
And so we have no overarching governmental system here, and Nome is only, the municipal government of Nome is only responsible for 36 square miles.
Yeah.
So even though we're the hub, every tribe in this, we're sort of in a non-native look to translate, because for everybody online that lives here, there's a lot of non-native visitors here, so I'm just gonna say it like this. It's more, the Bering Strait region is a lot like Europe without the EU. So everyone has a sovereign government here. We have 20 sovereign governments. So how to tackle that might be really different than your Matsu borough, right? And we have
these types of work around the world, so we're global.
Yep, and so for us here, where we are also not as fiscally robust as our other regional neighbors, really, for us, it is working, if you live here, so we're in the regional hub, it's working, and these guys, Jackie was talking about what she does as an individual researcher, but it's a really good question, and we have so many people coming through the region. So I would say get in touch with your regional media. So we have the Nome Nugget here tonight. We also have regional radio here. We have several radio stations. And if you can, contact your tribal governments throughout your region, like we do here. And for this sort of format, this is everyone. It's not it's not replacing at all talking to the tribes in any capacity for any of the researchers. It is a public forum. We have our media here, and that's really for such a remote, logistically robust and financially not robust region. It's really the way we do it. And I think one of the things in the Bering Strait region is we often don't have a lot but we have each other in this region, and you'd be surprised how much you can do when everyone's pulling together. So something like this, where we have people currently listening in from St. Lawrence Island.
Sure.
Um,
Well, when
that
we
really
have-
makes a
We have
difference.
scientists that typically
But-
present at scientific institutions and that.
I'm gonna stop right there
Please, go ahead.
because we're getting down away from everybody who might, but I'm going to talk to you afterwards.
I bet.
Yeah. But let's ask more questions on the thing. I have one question. If I can, because I'm blabbing away.
No, that's okay, well, you're glad, I
Wait,
said,
sure.
I thank people, just by the way, you can't see it here because they're East Coast people, I said good night. They said thank you, and I thank
you're-
everybody for kind things, including you.
And Julian Middleton has a question about the pore size on your filter. She would like you to. You see that?
We use Walkman glass fiber filters, and I think the nominal pore size is 0.7 microns, I think, yeah.
Okay, so are you guys gonna get that nutrient data? Is that real time on the ship? You'll know the nutrient levels, or is that? gonna
We
take
take in our case, we take them home,
Okay.
and frozen, and then they're analyzed, in a laboratory at our lab.
And I ask that because we have such elevated water temperatures right now that there is. In 2022, as you pointed out, we had the most massive, persistent and toxic bloom of Alexandrium. Which is a harmful algae for people that creates a problem. And our water is very elevated currently, not so in the Chukchi and Beaufort, but we had low ices, as Lee mentioned, so we've had a long time to warm. And if you are thinking, does it sound like your macrofaunal, like there's more nutrients in the system? in a
Well,
year where
that's
we
just
have
a
little
guess
light?
I had that we noticed in 2018 following that last
Okay,
heat spell that the nutrient levels were as high as they ever were looking through the whole water column. So my hypothesis is that there wasn't an ice edge bloom.
Yeah.
So the nutrients got left behind. They're still in the water now.
yeah,
So they're there and available, and
Okay.
I mean, maybe just to follow on, I don't wanna go down this but it's very hard to do this sort of thing with communities, and we need to do more work on it, but one thing we've learned from communities, they eat tunicates, which are something.
all manner.
Yeah,
comprehensive
which
use
are
of
something
interest.
we collect, and so we've passed on that little bit of local intelligence to the people. Saying, Kathy LaFave and so forth, we'll collect tunicates for you and give them to you, analyze them, because these are animals that filter feed a lot of Alexandrium.
Right, and
And so I don't know what the results of that are, but it's another organism that ought to be targeted for the sampling, and so they're doing that now, and we're helping to provide those samples.
And if you're still on, because I can't see the names because I'm sitting in a chair, if St. Lawrence Island or any of our other communities are listening in right now, the tunicates are what Gamble and Samunga would call upa, and the relatives of that, the other species of upa-like foods. So that's tunicates.
Okay, one thing I should say is that they thanked you, Gabe, before, you'll see these on your.
You don't have to read those.
Yeah, but to put it on the email service, so you don't wanna lose it, you wanna make sure, because whatever you send it out on, they're appreciative.
Yes, and I appreciate those comments back, so thank you very much. And we won't lose those.
No, I'm just gonna save the chat to this computer, so.
Yep, thank you so much.
We got a stroke, Gabe, yeah, she's gotta get better.
Does anyone else have questions? We've got Nome in the audience right here, so. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I'm Charlie Lean. I'm a retired fish biologist for a number of agencies. And it's really, in the past, we've had very inconsistent crawl surveys for crab and salmon. And as a manager, it was terribly frustrating because you get, early season read and a late season read, and they sometimes aren't apples and oranges. I was impressed how you've been able to do this for 20-some, 30-ish years. Basically my entire career. And with some consistency, I wish I could say I've done the same. Anyway, so that.
I would just say
for
that's because of this collaboration we have, because
Yeah.
Canadians always have to go to the Canadian waters.
Yeah.
And we built this up, because we do 42 stations now, and we started with 7. I was invited to come in 1998. And that was 7, and that was 2005. We can't do any more in the amount of time we have, but it's that fact, within a day every year, and we would never have been able to do that. And now we get other cruises, the Kuliak and Healy, but it depends on the timing, right? It
Right.
depends on the question, and it changes every 3 years. But we still embed some of these measurements in those process cruises, but it's because we can have this annual cruise with this Canadian collaboration that's made that time series.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I also work for Lisa Clow at times.
Oh, yeah. I know.
I was the local guide for her cruise up in Kotzebue
Ah, okay.
and showed her, made sure everybody came home in one piece. But I was more of a logistics and mechanic than I was a biologist at that point. But I do have a background in biology. She did lots of benthic
That's right.
estuarine.
Yeah, she's quite high up in NSF right now.
And I think that work in Kotzebue, it's really a nice model for how we as scientists can work with local communities, so I think highly of that work that you guys did.
Yeah, and then Katrina Eichen has been working with folks out of Kotzebue to, who's
Do
this?
you have any sediment analysis at these locations, looking into iron content, and you'll have to finish that?
Iron.
No. We do sediment.
Yeah, we do sediment, carbon, nitrogen, total organic carbon, carbon and nitrogen isotopes, grain size. So a lot of stuff, and we collect samples for other people, so actually it's hard to get all the surface sediments that people want, so we're doing fatty acids, or someone else is doing fatty acids, we're doing ostracods, which are calcium carbonate organisms that may be somewhat resistant to ocean acidification.
IP25
IP25's fatty acid.
or sea ice algae.
Yeah, sea ice algae.
Myofauna.
Yeah, so we're doing, some samples are going to Poland on this cruise for myofauna. So there's a bunch of people that have put in requests, and we're doing the best we can to accommodate everybody. As well as the
What we originally proposed.
yeah. But iron, no, we're not measuring any of the sediments for iron content.
No.
I think the assumption, if it's iron limited, it probably isn't in most of the waters that we sample, just because they're so productive, there's so much nitrate, phosphate fertilizer in there. Maybe that's more of an issue in coastal waters in Alaska. There might be some reason to think there's iron limitation.
And I just should add too, because when I talked about the Pan-Arctic, Eddie Carmack and others from Canada and DC are starting a sub-Arctic, DBO along that Canadian area where they have a lot of coastal indigenous, not indigenous, First Nation.
Nunavut?
Huh? No, this is now in
British Columbia.
Oh, British
Columbia. So they're building it, they have a, kind of like you've got your sailboat going out, they have a private vessel, they're doing some core measures based off of this DBO. They're picking some stations, but they're building it with the First Nation communities. So those measurements are near shore and related, they have a lot of fish. So that is really an exciting thing, because there's also reciprocal, because we've been trying to build, how do you get the DBO to get the communities to do the collection in the near shore that our ships don't go to, that something would be valuable that they want to measure. So, providing CTDs or some core measurements or something like that. So it's a build-up process, but they are building it in British Columbia.
Go Canada. Canada always does a nice job working with Indigenous peoples.
Right.
Honestly, they're way more advanced, I think, in some respects.
So let's see, there's one more, let's see what else is this, and then I think we can. Sediment out these location, looking in the iron con, we already talked about it, it says thank you.
Okay.
That was from Mary McDonald, okay,
I got one last question.
okay,
What's your forecast, given that we now see, you were mentioning the animals are moving and stuff, but we're now seeing fin whales going all the way to Utqiagvik. we're seeing humpback whales going all the way to Utqiagvik, stellar sea lions now, they've had a one or two go up there, and they're in the eastern Siberian Sea, sometimes they're being seen up there. All this shift, as the fish are moving north as well, the pollock and the Russian commercial fishermen are moving north, right? They're fishing commercially, trawling for pollock in this high central Chukchi Sea, opposite, just on their inside EEZ waters, right off the maritime boundary, up as far north as Point Hope.
Right.
So what would you say, is all this rush north because our food in the north is changing better for them? Or is it because to the south of them, it's not so good? Is there like any kind of thought on that, like they're running because it's a new food area, or they're coming north because it doesn't look so good?
I think it's a combination, but I think that the food supply, and I'm talking now for the system I like, the benthic system,
Benthic
is
system.
it's negative. We're having those declines specifically south of Bering Strait, because it's becoming more temperate. There's not the two-season pulse, there's not the sea ice algal production as much, which is a very lipid, because in the spring, if you have that really rich ice algae, it goes to the bottom, because there's no zooplankton. A lot of gobbling food for all the
We're
animals.
shallow. here.
Very shallow, and it's very fatty, it's like going to have some fat versus having some lean vegetable, which is of course good for the people, but for these animals, you know, so I think that's the issue down here. And then so and without the ice, with the ice pulling back earlier, these animals are just moving north for the forage. If you're trying to go down and you don't see the food you normally have, then you just keep going north. It's kind of like we go to a restaurant, we don't like it, we go somewhere else. And I think that's exactly what's happening there. We still have a lot of rich areas, but they're more in the Chukchi Sea, in the southern Chukchi Sea, and some areas in the northeast.
So are we trending in 10 years more of this?
I think there's trending more the fact that it's very rich, we're gonna have higher, some areas will be higher production. I think this area is gonna be limited, and this is something we proposed back in if you change and make all the food being less food, more stratification of the water, warming water, smaller animals, they're gonna be consumed by the water column, and there's gonna be less for the guys on the bottom. When I started as my program back in the 80s PhD, this was the breadbasket of benthic systems. Nobody had done that much. Stoker did it, then I did it, then others went beyond, Howard Fader. But you could put on the hands the number of people. But the production has gone down dramatically in the Bering Strait region. If you go north of Bering Strait, you still have that really tight hotspot, but it's offshore, and it's just the tip of the Russians have on that, because that's where the currents take the carbon and they deposit it. So to me, you're gonna continue to see these declines we're seeing in the benthos. The time series, it's not as much for the zooplankton, because the zooplankton is, goes with the water.
So as like the bird people know, starting in 2017, we've had starvation events in multi-species seabirds almost every year. Up until last year, it kind of slowed down. And we've also had a 2019 unusual mortality event at the federal level declared for 3 species of our ice seals for starvation in that year. So it is hard for us, for me, I'm sure for others, to see our animals in poor body condition when we were, as you remember, this was an area of just complete richness for these.
Right.
So thank you for
So I mean, it's
just pointed out.
it's what I see it is like if you took a balloon a water balloon and you're squeezing the bottom, because this is south of Bering Strait, there will be an expansion, but will it stay in the US side of the water? Will those animals, could they go to the west? I mean, there's speculations on that, but I think that for this area here, you're gonna have to, because you're gonna get those big mouth pollock and those cod that they just consume my benthic animals like nothing, so. That's what I see. And the gray whale, I think the unusual mortality event apparently is right on the cusp of happening. What that's gonna, you got all this traffic,
That's happening further south. That's what leads me to wonder if the conditions to the south of us are not.
Well, I think the thing is that these animals are coming north, that traditionally would feed north to St. Lawrence Island. And it's not there, because breadbasket, I mean, there's fruit there, but it's like this. So they're just going further north and they're gonna consume. But these things are long-lived animals, yeah, I mean, the benthic animals are 10 to 50 years, so you take the big adults, what happens when you take the adults and they can't reproduce? Yeah, so there's a whole, there's some more detail in it to say than high or low, but what's happening here is kind of what we projected would happen about 15 years. With that good news, here, go ahead.
So that, you know, looking at it from a guy that's worked on the nearshore fisheries, the Alaska nearshore current is warmer than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And we're up in the lethal zone for salmon, like 17 degrees Celsius frequently these years, last few years, and so the salmon fisheries on the Yukon and Thornton Sound are just
Yeah.
decimated, and it's part of that, I think, is, this is an opinion, not a fact, that the juvenile salmon go to sea and get cooked, basically, it's too warm. But the salmon that migrate further offshore, outside the Alaska nearshore current, are still hanging in there pretty well.
Because it's cooler, it's definitely cooler.
And so the you know, Kotzebue and Port Clarence salmon stocks are, and some of the red salmon are hanging in there because they're further out.
Mhm.
And I think the adult fish are swift enough and they can locate refugia, cold water refugia if they need be. And
But you take out the young,
Yeah.
you're taking out your class there, and that, I think that's throughout the biological
Yeah.
system. You know, and I see this in the benthic system too, if you take out the young,
Yeah.
you know, you may have, the older ones gonna get deeper in the sediment sometime.
Yeah.
But a lot of this is brood, a lot of broadcasting of these benthic animals, and like bivalve, they put them in the water column, but if it's too hot, they're not gonna.
And that things like crab or king crab, and they're on the bottom, so they're in the salty, cooler water,
Right, offshore.
but they too are starting to retract from eastern Norton Sound more quickly in the
Uh-huh.
springtime. So they're being driven out by fresh water and warmth.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think these times, there's these monitoring, there's some basic measurements you have to keep going. Because otherwise you're not gonna be able to build any type of projection, make some decisions, what's more important than that.
All right, well, thanks for cheering us up, Jackie.
Trying to save your chat, thank you.
All right, so with that, I guess we'll close out. We see the Coast Guard ship Laurier is actually online. This is your one chance to catch all your customers. Do you have anything you want to say to the group? You could unmute and catch them all if there's anything of importance. You're the star of the show, really, while they're all waiting for you.
Jackie Lee and all the group, this is Rich Marriott, the captain of the Laurier. Can't wait to see you guys again on Friday. We'll see you in a couple days.
All right,
Okay.
thank you so much.
And with that, we'll just say thank you all, and we'll see you. The next Strait Science that's scheduled will be not until August 28th, and that will be about the cruise on Sikuliak, which will be coming back into Nome. And we'll hear more about that. So thank you all for coming.